Welcome back to The Predictable Revenue. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Philip Hum, the author of the story Selling Method. And we're going to talk about storytelling. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Colin. Thanks for having me.
I'm curious, maybe we can start about, why should, I think I'm on board, I'm sold, but if somebody's listening, they're like, this is a sales podcast. Why should I listen to two guys talk about storytelling?
Well, sure. Yeah. So let's take a salesperson, right? And all the listeners. Usually we go into these meetings and we start pitching our product and we're like, we're the greatest company on earth. We operate in 20 markets and we invest 10% in R&D. We're the coolest. And these are all beautiful facts and you should definitely say them, right? But just think, how memorable will these be? Do you think that your buyer will remember them a day, a week, a month later? No chance, right? And so if you want to be remembered, well, you got to appeal to the emotions. And the quickest way to appeal to someone's emotions is by sharing stories.
Talk to me about your thoughts on what is a good story? What is from a length, beginning, middle, end kind of perspective? What are some of the high notes when you think about telling a good story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To the first point, what you said on length, when I wrote my book, I analyzed the best stories that I've listened to in all the interviews before. And what I found there is that the average sales story is 1 minute 27. And that's not that long. And when you think of your sales story and you go about it in 3, 5, 10 minutes, sure, maybe if it's an incredible story, you can do that. But otherwise, it should be a fairly short story. It should be a relatable story where the other person can see themselves in. But you want to keep it pretty concise in the sales context. Now, that being said, even though it's concise, you still want to tick some of the boxes there, right? So usually the best stories, they're emotional, they're visual, and they have some sort of element of surprise in there. Because if everything's predictable in that story, well, I've no reason to listen to you, right? But if there are some things where ooh, I didn't see that coming, I'm more interested to listen to the rest of the.
Where's the emotion there? We transacted, they hired us, we did the thing, they got this value. Where's the emotion?
You can let me share one technique with you, how you can add a lot of emotions to your story. One of my favorite techniques to add emotions is called inner dialogue. And that is, you share some of the thoughts that are going on in the main characters or your head, in your head. And for example, we have all these fears, worries, hopes, dreams in our heads. For the story, share some of these in the crucial moment of the story. Example, instead of just saying, I'm very excited about delivering that pitch, you say, oh man, this will be the best pitch of my life, right? Everyone will look at this and think that I'm a freaking genius. One example, or let's say you delivered that pitch and it went really bad. Instead of just saying, that was a terrible pitch, you say, and everyone will think now I'm a failure, right? I should move country right now. This ain't working out for me. I'm obviously exaggerating a little bit, but you see, you can share some of these thoughts that are going on in our heads. That way, that's the easiest way to make any story more emotional.
And then the visual element, if I'm what I sell, I'm trying to think through the lens of predictable revenue. We sell sales development services and consulting. How do I make that visual? It's a person. His name is Diego. He's amazing on the telephone. Imagine picking up that red telephone and dialing for you.
Yeah, that's one thing that we got to worry for, right? Well, watch out for, because a lot of people, they change their entire voice. They're like, once upon a time, and was this it? And that's just completely fake. Let me share again my favorite technique to make any story more visual, especially in a customer context. For you, let's say you work with another customer. What you can then share to make it more visual is the exact words that person used, maybe in the challenge of the story or at the end. Example, 2 weeks later, the customer called you and said, wow, Colin, thank you so much. Because of your consulting, I increased my revenue now by 50%. It's insane. Thank you so much. Right? I use the direct words that customer used in that specific moment.
Right. Okay. So if I try and put this...
And that could be either at the end So let's say when the transformation is done, or before in the challenge, so that you talk to the customer and the customer says, "Ah, Colin, I don't know what's going on, but I've tried everything and nothing seems to work out here."
Mhm.
See, so the direct words that we use in that specific moment.
Gotcha. So if I'm just thinking about a case study that I just wrote, or I did the interview last week, and the comment that stuck out for me, I would probably use it at the end. They were a marketing leader, and they said something along the lines of like, we love having predictable revenue around because we know that even if our like normal inbound has a bad week, we're still going to get like a number of high quality meetings from the predictable revenue team. And they love looking at the reports every Friday. And I was like, oh, wow, that stuck out for me. Is that kind of an example? So I could like land the story there, or like I would tell their story and then land it with that as like a way of making it more emotional.
Yeah, for sure. Yes. You could use that definitely as a story. What you always want to make sure is when you include this dialogue or the exact words in that moment, that you use very specific and catchy words. If you say, the customer said da, 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 all these different things, well, it's not that memorable. But if that customer says, wow, hey, Colin, we have this major problem that we haven't been able to solve. Oh, can you stop there? Well, then it's becoming very memorable. So on dialogue, you want to use very catchy short words to make it more visual.
Is there just one type of story that we need to tell, or are there multiple different types of stories?
There are tons of different stories that you need to tell. But what I realized when I started on this whole storytelling journey in sales, I was overwhelmed by, hey, these are the 50 story types that you need to master. And when I saw that, I tried to think really hard and interview tons of people. Hey, what are the 3 fundamental story types that you need to know? And that's why I boiled it down to these 3 right now that I think, or what all my clients see as well, is give you the biggest results.
Cool.
And they're usually connection story, success story, and then, the other one, I think we didn't talk about that, but the value story, or your differentiation story.
How do you use a story to build a connection?
Yeah, perfect. So connection stories, these are tiny stories. What happens? You and everyone, all the listeners can think right now of the last meeting that they had with a customer, right? How did the small talk go? What did you talk about? And usually it's like, hey, good morning. How are you? Good. How are you? And maybe you talk about the weather. Maybe you talk about traffic. Maybe you talk about COVID. Talk about all of these standard topics. And nothing bad with that, right? Everyone does it. But it's just standard. And with the standard, you're staying at the same level of relationship. And so what you can do instead is you can share a tiny story. One of these short, relatable stories to build a connection. Let me give you an example, okay? You want to ask me, how are you?
How you doing?
Good. Well, yesterday I had this little moment of disappointment. Yesterday I tried out for the first time padel. It's, I think, similar to pickleball in the US. And I thought, me as a former tennis player, I'll crush it. I'll be extremely good. Well, I hit every single ball in the net. I completely sucked at it. Anyway, when was the last time that you tried out a new hobby, and how was that for you? No need to respond unless you want to. But did you see there what I did? So someone asked me, how are you? And I choose to respond with this short connection story.
Interesting. And now that connection story is true today, but you could probably only milk that for, if I'm in sales, a week, maybe 2 weeks as your connection story. Especially if you're doing like a multi-call close, you don't want to be like, they're like, hey, how you doing? Be like, oh, they'll tell the pickleball story, and you're like, did you tell that last
week? True. Yeah. At the beginning, you may be using one story a few more times, right? Or maybe this happened a week ago. But after some time, once you train yourself, you'll find these moments very quickly. And then every moment you think for it for 10 seconds, you're like, okay, that's a good story. And then you'll share that. So it gets easier with time. At the beginning, you need some prefabrication a little bit.
So let's talk about what goes into building a connection story. Because it sounds like it's probably a little bit deeper than I tried something last week and it didn't go well. So help me understand, what are the things that you're looking for? And what are the components of a good connection story?
Yeah. So usually 3 components. First, transition in. Transition in is very much just one sentence where you get the other person excited, and you can say, I said, for example, I'm good. I had this, what did I say? I had this moment of disappointment yesterday. So moment of disappointment, that's already giving it some value. And you're like, ooh, what's about to come? Or if I say, I had this really interesting experience, or I read this odd article. So just one sentence that hooks your audience. That's one, transition in. Second is share your story. And the story can be anything that is more personal than weather or traffic. And that can be anything interesting that has happened lately. Maybe you picked up a new skill lately. Maybe there's some small thing that annoys you that is still fun to share, but really anything that is a little bit more personal, I'd say. The options are really infinite there. And then last step, and that's actually the hardest one, because the purpose of these connection stories is to build rapport with the other person. And you don't build rapport just by sharing a story, but you build rapport by getting the story from the other person. And so the last step, transition out, that's about asking a question where the other person can respond with a story in return. That is, for example, a story. A bad question would be, hey, how are you? That's bad, right? Because you wouldn't respond with a story. Or if I say, so how was your day? That doesn't get a story in return. But if I ask, hey, when was the last time that, I don't know, you went on a holiday with your family and how was that? Or when was the last time you tried a new sport? So all these, when was the last time, they ask for a specific moment and time. And that way you get a story in response. Also, if you ask for, let's say, the favorite or least favorite, best, worst, all of these extreme experiences, well, you'll get a very interesting story in response. How to craft these success stories. So I follow 4 steps for these success stories, and that's usually context, challenge, response, and result. And context, it's very quickly about giving some rough context. When does it take place? Who's the main character? What does the main character want in the situation in life? That's the first step. Very brief. Don't waste too much time, because I've seen lots of salespeople just giving context for like 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And that's most of the times it's not needed. That can be done in really a few sentences. You want to move as quickly as possible to the second step, which is challenge. And challenge, that's what is the main pain point, right? That customer or the main character is going through. But that's the most important part of any story. That's the part where you go a little bit deeper into the emotion. Very, very important. Fourth, response. That's how does the main character respond to that challenge? Or how do you help him go through that challenge? What are the actions, reactions, decision taken to overcome that challenge? And then fourth step and last step, result. That's how does it turn out at the end? How is, let's say, your client's life transformed? How does this situation turn out at the end? So just to recap, it's context, challenge, response, and result. Be coaching me. Anyway, we talk a little bit. And at one point, I asked her to share a story. Immediately when I say story, just this big ball of energy just shrinks to this pile of misery. I'm like, what's going on here? After the story, I asked her, what happened, Ezra? She told me that when that she's afraid how other people would make fun of her. We talked a little bit more. It turned out that she moved from Iraq to Canada when she was 12 years old, and that people were making fun of her English in these early days, and that somehow stuck. When she told me that, I knew that there's no point of working on the structure, no point of working on these elements. We needed to work on her self-limiting beliefs. And so what we focused on was, how could we rewrite the story that she tells herself? So at the end of the session, I asked her, hey, Esther, do you want to share maybe another story? She shared that story. When she's done, I just look at her like, wow, Ezra, this was beautiful, right? This is a cool story. You're a great storyteller. And she just looks at me and just says, thanks so much, right? I think she didn't realize it back then herself. Anyway, that's the story. I hope I wasn't crazy long now. Would be hairless.
I did pull the timer out, but I think you're pretty close on it. So what is a value story? Because we just talked about customer success story. Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah. Value story, or I call them differentiation story, they help share what is so unique about working with you. Sure, maybe that is covered sometimes in the success story, but most of the times it's, let's say there's something unique about working with you. Your customer, before making any decision, they need to know why should they work with you? Why should they bother to be in a relationship with you? They need to understand. And what most people do is they're like, again, we're the market leader. We have the super cool outbound system. And they bring facts in there. That's a beautiful part where you want to share a story of a value that you represent. So how do you craft them? It's first about thinking, what claim do you want to make? That could be, hey, I'm a consultant to your business, not a salesperson, or I am here for you 24/7. Whatever is your claim that you want to make. And then think, is there an experience in my past that would back up that claim? And then looking to your past, think, is there any moment where that would help me bring that claim to life? And then once you have that claim, you can structure it in the same way as we did with the success story. But then you have your moment, then you have your differentiation story.
I want to pull it up a little bit and talk about, just kind of land the episode with, let's talk about the impact you've seen these stories have. Obviously, you've been teaching people how to tell stories. You've been telling stories yourself. You've got your book. Help me understand the difference that you've seen in people's personal lives, professional lives, by just changing the way that they tell these stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What the biggest change that I see, and the one thing that I struggled the most with is that people realize that they can tell stories very quickly. At the beginning, everyone's like, I need to have this perfect story that I share now and everyone will love me after that. I think the biggest change that I see from people working with me is that on day one, they start sharing these tiny stories. And sure, they are not perfect. They can be improved, but they get the work done. After some time, you can refine them. But what I realized that by enabling people immediately to start sharing stories in their day-to-day, they'll get much more confident and they already see much more beautiful interactions coming up with all their customers. So that's, I think, the biggest change that I see with people, that they start straight away with these small stories and see the much deeper connection with their customers through that.
I love that. Philip, I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us about stories. You've got a book called The Story Selling Method, not Storytelling Method, that I screwed up in our pre-interview. Where can people find the book? And if people are looking for help, advice, coaching on story selling or storytelling, how do they get in touch with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the book you can find on Amazon. And if people want to get in touch with me, they can find me on LinkedIn. That's usually the easiest, Philip Humm, Humm. Or to check out my website, I think right now, storyselling.in. And there, just hit me up and I'd be happy to answer any questions and to help anyone advance on this storytelling journey.